"We're here!" The two syllables, bright and sharp, detonated in the small, stifling space of the car. Kenzie's eyes sprang open, not with the gentle confusion of waking, but with a shock of panic so potent her right hand shot forward, a desperate, involuntary grappling hook latching onto the nearest anchor point it could find. "Hey, watch it!" Piper wrenched her wrist away from Kenzie's iron grip, rubbing the abused skin and staring at her friend with a look of pure, unadulterated offense. As if Kenzie had spontaneously transformed into some kind of monstrous threat. From the driver's seat, Ezra, the silent ballast of the group, twisted around, his usual placidity curdled with genuine concern. "Sorry," Kenzie mumbled, the single word feeling heavy and inadequate. A wave of white-hot self-awareness, the realization of how utterly ridiculous and out of control she'd just seemed, crawled, prickly and sickening under her skin. "I think I was having a nightmare." The vestiges of the terror, an icy-cold residue, still clung to the back of her throat. "Well, wakey, wakey, we have arrived," Piper announced again, her voice snapping back to its usual, aggressively cheerful pep. She sounded like a tour guide trying to sell a condemned property. "Finally." Kenzie wiped the sleep from her eyes, trying to scrub away the lingering psychic grime of the dream. But as she turned her head to face the window, her immediate relief morphed into a creeping dread so intense it felt physical. Instantly, her breath hitched, then quickened into rabbit-fast gasps, and her head grew light and dizzy. The air in the car felt suddenly too thin, too cold. "What is this?" she whispered, the question not of inquiry, but of accusation. "It's the chalet," Piper said, her bright smile faltering around the edges, adopting a distinct, uneasy strain. The geography of betrayal. Kenzie pushed open the car door and stepped out, kneading the solid ground beneath her feet to steady the sudden alarming lurch in her stomach. She stared at the structure. It was a dark, angular shape, swallowed by encroaching trees, its roof patched with moss, and its single porch light buzzing with a tired, yellow malice. "This is not a chalet, Piper. This is a busted-up cabin in the middle of the woods." Kenzie's voice was low, sharp, and entirely devoid of heat, the kind of controlled anger that promised an explosion. The contrast between her promise and this grim reality was an immediate, devastating shock to her system. In the front seat, Ezra looked away, his silent agreement with Kenzie's assessment a loud clang in the sudden silence. "You promised me, Piper," Kenzie continued, stepping closer to the car door, her tone rising into a furious, panicked plea. "I gave you 3 non-negotiable conditions. I said no camping, no isolation, and certainly no backwoods BS, and you swore this wouldn't be that." The conditions weren't just preferences. They were boundaries, built of years of anxiety and carefully managed fears. Seeing them bulldozed felt like a deliberate act of sabotage. Piper scrambled out, rushing to stand between Kenzie and the offending cabin, waving her hands in a frantic defense. "It's not camping. It's inside. It has walls. And the woods are like way back there," she protested, gesturing vaguely into a dense, towering thicket of shadow. "Plus, there are a bunch of other chalets." "Cabins?" Kenzie interjected, her tone a correcting sting. "Fine, cabins on the grounds, and receptions in the main house, right over there," Piper finished, pointing in a random, indistinct direction across a patch of dead grass. "It's perfectly legit. No backwoods BS whatsoever. Scout's honor." Her final pledge, however, lacked all conviction, hanging limp in the cold air as the shadows around the cabin seemed to deepen, swallowing the afternoon light. Kenzie looked out at the house of horrors, the peeling paint, the cracked front steps, the opaque windows, the haphazard pile of wood fire. Nothing about it felt legit. Now she really was having a nightmare. She suddenly had the urge to grab hold of Piper again and give her a good squeeze, leave a mark, maybe break a bone so they could all go home. She gritted teeth against the thought and did her best to cast it out. She sighed. They were 3 hours from home and dusk was setting in. She had to make this work, at least for tonight, which meant she had to channel all her energy into pretending to be okay. But really, what else was new? Kenzie eyed Ezra in his rearview mirror. "You knew about this, didn't you? I brought taquitos and board games? A peace offering. Wise." "Come on, Kenz," Piper batted her eyelashes. "A little nature could do us all some good after the semester we've had." Rolling her eyes, Kenzie exited the car. Piper and Ezra joined her, one on either side, and she told herself to let their presence soften her. She could do this, couldn't she? "You know that, now that I know that you two can't be trusted, this is the one and only trip we'll ever take together, right?" "Well, then we better make it count." Piper smiled deviously, then bolted for the door. Ezra took off behind her, running in a zigzag to make Kenzie laugh. It worked. "Grr, I truly hate you guys." Before following, Kenzie leaned back into the car to grab her backpack. As she did so, she couldn't help but eye the woods across the way. Not at all like way back there, as Piper had tried to delude her, but right there, just on the other side of the car, facing the cabin, watching it, watching her. The thought sent a finger-like sensation crawling up her spine. She was not okay. She stared out at the gathering darkness between the trees. Blind spots. Not okay. She tried to trace the outline of each shadow with her eyes and commit them to memory, so she'd know if anything changed. But what was the point? Shadows were always changing, and the woods were anything but still. As if agreeing with her, a single tree branch shifted. Kenzie jumped. "Kenz?" Kenzie jumped again, this time twirling to face Ezra. She stared at him blankly, struggling to recall what a normal human expression looked like. Was she blinking? Should she be? "You good?" he asked. "No." "Of course." Ezra, looking not at all convinced, said nothing and let her lead the way into the cabin. The inside was just as grimy as the outside. A tattered green carpet covered most of the floor in the living room, where there was a gas stove fireplace that looked sticky to the touch, and two mismatched couches, both as ratty as the carpet. Off of the living room were 3 doors, presumably a bathroom and 2 bedrooms, and a small but functional kitchen. Kenzie shivered, goosebumps erupting down her arms. It wasn't just her unease. The late summer chill had taken up residence in the ill-insulated walls, along with several mice, judging from the droppings Kenzie immediately spotted in the first cabinet she opened. She envisioned it, pointy nails skittering across the floor, razor-sharp teeth chewing through wood and tearing open bags of chips and dry pasta, puncturing flesh if given a chance, prey playing predator games. But she'd show them. She was no one's prey. Kenzie's eyes wandered towards the window again. More movement in the trees. She braced, feeling eyes on her in the distance. Her nostrils flared as she gathered her breath and steeled her resolve. "We need to seal up these mouse holes," she blurted, her fight instinct taking over. She needed to do something, take action, fix this. "Did anyone bring duct tape?" Piper laughed. "Why would we bring duct tape? You didn't." "Because I was told I was going to a fancy chalet with a hot tub." "Well, that wasn't entirely a lie. There is a hot tub. Kind of. It's actually a natural hot spring just up the hill, less than a 10-minute hike from us." "That does sound better than housework. Can't we call guest services to seal these up for us?" Ezra pondered, inspecting the holes himself. "They closed about 20 minutes ago, but they open at 6, so we'll get it taken care of first thing in the morning." "I want it taken care of now," Kenzie said. "I'm sure I can rig something up." "But the spring," Piper groaned. "You guys go. I'd prefer a cozy night in anyways." After a little more back and forth, Piper and Ezra hesitantly agreed to go without her, knowing she likely needed the alone time to come to terms with what this weekend was going to be. They left, and Kenzie got to work. She had to make this okay. She had to be okay. Pretending simply wouldn't cut it. Not this time. Mice were apparently a problem the grounds had dealt with before, because Kenzie found packages of steel wool in a drawer. After carefully stuffing the holes, she'd found that the adrenaline buzzing through her body hadn't yet been satisfied. She needed to do more before the restlessness and frustration turned into anger. She could feel it simmering just below the surface, scratching her insides, trying to break free. But no, while that would be entirely justified, it wouldn't be productive. But cleaning would be, so that's what she decided to do. Just a little light scrubbing, then she'd read a book and try not to hate her friends. She reminded herself that one of the main reasons she continued to hang out with Piper and Ezra was their nearly supernatural gift for pushing her out of her comfort zone. Sometimes she needed that. She told herself that maybe this could be one of those times. Taking a deep breath, Kenzie dug out a sponge and an unidentified spray bottle and got to work. Sometime later, she wasn't sure how long, she noticed that the chill in the air had turned to actual cold. With no cell reception, Kenzie could only assume they'd be back soon. After preheating the oven for the taquitos, she headed outside to collect firewood, noting how creaky the front door was. The sound echoed through the night. When had it gotten so dark? Kenzie eyed her surroundings. People always talked about the peace and quiet of the forest. In reality, though, it was anything but. Kenzie stood still, peering into the blackness and listening to the symphony of the wild night. The screeching cicadas, the chirps and calls of the night birds, the snapping twigs as mice and other rodents scuttered about, the rustling leaves, and then the screams. Kenzie's heart jolted. Suddenly, there were screams carrying on the wind from deep in the trees. The screams of a woman, or women, or people. Kenzie's adrenaline kicked into overtime, her fingers and toes going numb as her blood flow was redirected to her core organs, preparing her body for a fight. She bolted into the trees, trying to assess what direction the terrifying sounds were coming from. But it was also confusing. A collection of distorted, high-pitched shrieks that seemed to be bouncing from tree to tree, clashing and colliding, coming and going, then coming again. She ran at it. She didn't allow herself to overthink it, didn't give herself any time to make sense of it. There was nothing to make sense of. Violence was senseless. No one knew that better than Kenzie. And so she ran and ran and ran as branches clawed at her hair and grabbed at her clothes, ran as the wind whipped across her face, ran as her lungs constricted and expanded, each breath burning hot with the effort. She ran and kept running, and when she finally stopped, it was only to avoid slamming into a shape emerging from the shadows. A man. Just then, as if on cue, the screams died. "You heard that?" he gasped, bending over to catch his breath. "Those screams?" Kenzie nodded, taking a cautious step back from him. "Where'd you come from?" Kenzie asked in a strong voice, as she ground her back heel deeper into the dirt, ready to pounce if necessary. "Over there," the man gestured vaguely over his shoulder. "I'm in cabin B. You?" Kenzie concentrated on focusing her vision. He wore a red cap, a flannel open over a dark tee, jeans. An ordinary-looking man. Not that that meant a thing. "Look," he continued, stepping towards her. "I think we should stick together." "Stay back," Kenzie growled. "I'm not going anywhere with—" Screak! The screams came again, this time from behind her, from the direction Kenzie had just come, but also from beside them, from everywhere it seemed. Kenzie's braid slapped her cheek as she spun on her heel, but before she could assess anything, a new sound arose. Wet and thick and sloppy. Then came the smell. Iron? No. Blood. Kenzie turned back to the stranger, but he was no longer there. Instead, she discovered that a hole in the ground had suddenly appeared between herself and where the man used to be. He must have literally walked into a trap. Slowly, Kenzie leaned forward and peered into the hole. She made eye contact with the man, but his eyes could not see hers. Wide open with the shock of sudden death, he would never see anything again. The sharply gnarled tree branch sticking out from his chest and pointing up at Kenzie ensured that. A breathy "what the" was all Kenzie managed before rustling leaves to her left stole her attention. A figure, slow, sure-footed, and tall, too tall, began to materialize. Not again. It was something straight out of a monster movie. Not a man, exactly, but not quite animal, either. A wolf that stood on his hind legs, towering over Kenzie. The second one she'd encountered in her life. Impossible odds, and yet... She took in his sword-like canines and claws that articulated like fingers as he twirled a skull-shaped rock in his paw. She watched as his snout stretched into a perverse grin, exuding the kind of evil that could only ever exist in a certain kind of human, in the kind of human who would shred others into spaghetti if given half the chance. And this jerkwad would certainly make the most of his chance if she gave it to him. No, The urge to lunge at him rose inside of her like a tidal wave crashing against her ribs. All she wanted in that moment was to shrug off the fear, to peel away the shame, to stop running, to let the swelling anger erupt, to finally self-destruct in the most visceral and beautiful way, to let go. But no. Despite the impulses rushing through her body, her brain was still her own, and it said to be rational, to be normal, to survive some other way. Any other way. Final girls in horror movies did it all the time. They fought, yes, but not with animal instincts, with humanity. And that's exactly what Kenzie would do now. She would fight to stay in control, fight to stay alive, fight back the darkness inside. To embrace it would be her true and utter death. And so Kenzie ran. She thought only two thoughts. Get to Piper and Ezra. Get to the car. As she tore through the trees, following the light of her cabin, the screams rang in her ears once again, a cacophony of confusion and terror, the very sound of death rattling her bones. She knew it could indicate another trap ahead, or behind. It was still hard to tell. Get to Piper and Ezra. Get to the car. The cabin was a straight shot, in view now. The hill was directly behind it, and at the top of it would be Piper and Ezra. She had to keep going. Scream!
Just keep going. She kept going until she tripped over something both hard and soft. A body. Two bodies. A man and a woman. Both blonde, neither Piper nor Ezra, and both eviscerated. It really was happening again. "Kenzie!" Piper's voice sliced through her thoughts. She and Ezra were running past the cabin towards her, dripping wet. "Are you okay? We heard screaming!" Panic drummed in Kenzie's chest now. She had to get them out of here, now. "Ezra, the keys! Inside! Get them!" Ezra spun around, but halted at the sound of Piper's guttural cry. She'd spotted the bodies. Kenzie leapt over the viscera, trying to shield her from it. "Just stay back! We need to—" She froze. A shadow in her periphery. Tall. Too tall. She turned, and there he was. Somehow he had intercepted them and was standing on one side of the cabin, Ezra on the other, both equal distances from the door, both completely still. Kenzie reached out and grabbed Piper's wrist, yanking her behind herself. She stared at Ezra, tried to apologize to him with her eyes, squeezed Piper, hoping to reassure her. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She'd had a plan. She'd wanted so bad to be a final girl, to simply survive. But surviving wasn't enough. It never had been. Not the first time, 10 years prior, when surviving had deconstructed everything that had made her her, replacing key parts with anger, loneliness, panic, fear, and shame. So much shame. She was ashamed of what surviving had done to her, of what she had become, the reflection of the very thing that stood before her now, hungry, evil, and predatory. A werewolf. "I wouldn't move if I were you," she yelled out, eyeing the beast. She felt Piper tense against her, saw Ezra's eyes bulge. She ignored them. She saw now what the werewolf held in his hand. Not a skull-shaped rock, but a death whistle, the source of the screams. She understood now that they'd been artificial, a scare tactic, a hunting tactic, a monster with a human's brain. Was there anything more dangerous? She didn't think so. But Kenzie was no one's prey, and she wouldn't allow her friends to be either. "Or else," he replied, voice deep, raspy, and menacing. He smirked. "You're just like me, after all, aren't you?" So he knew. No surprise. She couldn't hide from monsters anymore. Like finds like. "This is all my fault," she whispered. It was no more room for pretending. Not to him, and not to them. She looked at Ezra, then Piper. She heard their hearts pound in fear and confusion. Next up, betrayal. Kenzie took a deep breath. "Never." Kenzie straightened. "I'm nothing like you. You're a monster." "And you are. A hero?" Kenzie shook her head, a sardonic laugh rising her chest but not releasing. "No, I'm a fighter." She looked at her friends and smiled sadly. "No matter what happens," she said, "remember that I'm still me, and that the woods were not my idea." Then Kenzie stepped forward and let her instincts take over. Let her bones crack and reshape. Let her jaw stretch and tear anew. Let her skin peel away and the fur to break through. In one painful moment, her change was complete. She eyed her prey. Finally, the anger had a place to go. The hatred she'd lived with for too long finally had a target other than her mirror. She pounced. "We're here." Kenzie's eyes fluttered open. The lights were so bright, the hums and beeps so loud. Piper's hand slipped into her own, and her voice came again. "We're both here with you. You're in the hospital." Kenzie tried to sit up but couldn't. "Whoa! Take it easy!" Ezra adjusted her pillow for her. "You're both here?" "Of course, silly," Piper smiled. "But why, now that you know what I am?" Ezra took her other hand. "We have no idea what you are, but we know who you are, our best friend and our hero." "And that's all that matters," Piper added. "You'll tell us the rest when you're ready. Until then, let me get you some water and a nurse. They'll want to know you're awake." Kenzie felt the tears clawing at the back of her throat and started to swallow them down. Then she tried something new. She let them fall instead. The warmth of their hands was real, the soft cotton of the sheets, the sterile, almost metallic scent of the hospital room. It was all tangible. Kenzie squeezed Piper's hand, the gesture conveying a lifetime of shared secrets and unspoken gratitude. She felt the tears track down her temples and into her hair, a relief that transcended the pain of her injuries. She was safe. She was loved. They hadn't run. But as she focused on the sounds, on the mechanical symphony of the life support, something shifted. The humming of the machines wasn't consistent. It had a rhythmic, synthetic quality, almost like a loop repeating every few seconds. And the bright lights weren't just hospital lights. They were too uniform, too white, without the slightest flicker or shadow that would betray a normal fluorescent tube. "Piper, what's the date?" Kenzie's voice was raspy. "October 12th, Piper said, her smile utterly genuine. A little too genuine. "Ezra, where exactly are my injuries?" Ezra's expression didn't waver. "You took a nasty fall, Kenz. Concussion, a few broken ribs, but you'll be fine. Just focus on resting." Kenzie closed her eyes, trying to recall the moments before the blackout, the panic, the desperate flight, the revelation of her true, terrifying nature to her friends, and then the flash of blue light as she was cornered. She hadn't fallen. She'd been intercepted. When she opened her eyes again, she looked not at her friends, but at the reflection in the polished glass of the picture frame on the bedside table. The reflection wasn't crisp. It was slightly blurry, as if seen through a layer of steam. She looked at Piper, who was still smiling. Piper's necklace, a small silver hummingbird, was slightly offset. She knew with absolute certainty that Piper always corrected it the moment it shifted. But this Piper didn't. Kenzie inhaled deeply, the hospital air tasting of mint and metal. She needed to test the parameters. "Ezra, the old tree swing, remember when we broke it trying to fit all of us on it?" Ezra chuckled, a warm, familiar sound. "How could I forget? We got grounded for a week." "No," Kenzie whispered, her eyes fixed on the slight, almost imperceptible fuzziness around Ezra's outline. "We didn't get grounded. Your dad just made us help him fix it. We spent the whole afternoon laughing." Ezra's smile faltered. For a split second, his eyes, that familiar warm brown, flickered to a cold, flat gray. Piper, sensing the shift, tightened her grip. "Kenzie, honey, you're just confused from the head trauma. Just relax." Kenzie felt a surge of energy, a power she had been suppressing for years, well up in her chest. this comforting hospital room, the loving, forgiving faces of her best friends. It was a trap, a perfect, painstakingly created simulation designed to keep her calm, docile, and contained. The real Piper and Ezra were likely safe, or perhaps they were the very reason the captors had been able to craft this convincing illusion. "I know who I am," Kenzie said, her voice low and resonant, no longer a question but a declaration. "I am the glitch in your system." She didn't try to move her arms. Instead, she focused the raw, kinetic energy she controlled, the very thing that had frightened her friends, and directed it inward. She pushed against the artificial reality until the beeping of the monitor became a siren. The bright lights began to strobe, and the figures of Piper and Ezra started to distort, their faces stretching and their outlines fracturing into colored static. Piper's final, terrified words were no longer in her familiar voice, but a sharp, synthesized command. "Contingency Protocol 7! Containment breach imminent!" The gentle squeeze of her hand turned into a vice. With a final explosive mental push, the simulation shattered like glass. Kenzie was no longer in a hospital bed. She was floating, restrained in a column of pulsing blue energy in a vast, dark underground chamber. Ezra and Piper were nowhere to be seen. Instead, dozens of figures in white, sterile suits stood watching her, their faces obscured by reflective visors, their silent scrutiny far more terrifying than any verbal condemnation. Kenzie, floating alone in the blinding blue light, finally understood the full, desperate meaning of her tears. They were not tears of gratitude for her friend's acceptance, but tears of pure, strategic anguish, a decoy. She had let them fall so that the system monitoring her emotional state would register relief and submission, allowing her to gather the strength to break free. She was out of the illusion, but now the real fight had begun.